I am Kathleen O'Connell. I'm the National Education Director at the New York Times, and I'm with Walter Barleycorn, our Education Manager who handles Queensborough Community College, as well as Dr. Gapper, who is one of our faculty advocates from the nursing department who has successfully integrated the Times today. So what we're going to do is really take you through some examples of how to do this. If you're interested in bringing a national newspaper like the New York Times into your course, we'll provide you with examples of how other faculty have done that. And then we'll show you some online resources that we have available that work really well in conjunction with the newspaper. Before I get started, can anyone, with just a show of hands, tell me if you've ever used a newspaper in your course? So a few of you, great. Does anyone want to share quickly how you've done that? While we're chewing, we're at a dentist's office. Any examples? Yes. Either one of you, yes. You go ahead.
I teach theater, and we did a project called The Living Newspaper, where students actually perform articles in the newspaper.
So they created plays from articles. Oh, so nice. Oh, how did you? I'd love to see that. If you have, yeah, we could put it on our website. And how did you use it, sir?
I'm the faculty advisor on the campus newspaper here. I teach journalism. So one semester I had all the students actually subscribe to the New York Times, and we use that as a model, not to try to imitate it, to simply use it as a model for analysis. And what makes a story, how to use narration, how to sometimes write leads, to teach the basics of putting the story together. The way that I use newspaper is simply, of course, to cut them up and select articles and use it as content.
Perfect. Great, thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
I teach basic skills, writing and reading work, and I use the Times a lot in both reading and writing. We usually use the Times in a particular way where we talk about the term controversial, the word controversy, which some of them don't know, especially ESL students. And then we do this thing where we search through the Times for articles to identify articles that have controversial topics, that involve controversial topics. And then they have to do this before each week, what's controversial about it, what's their opinion. But it's really great because in this way they have to really identify, where's the topic where there's more than one side. Yeah. There are other articles that are not like that.
That's great. It's perfect. Great, thank you. So we'll talk and we'll show you some other examples. This quote, we just love this quote. A little over 10 years ago, we started what we call readership programs on college campuses, where a bulk number of newspapers are dropped and students are able to access them whenever they're on campus. And the reason that this really started was the president at Penn State, Graham Spanier, was in a classroom one day and started asking current event questions and was just looked at with a sea of blank faces. So it was very alarming to him that students really weren't up on current events. So he felt it was very necessary to bring newspapers to the campus because students weren't going out and necessarily gathering information on their own. We all know when students are incredibly busy, so it's very difficult for them to run to Starbucks and purchase a newspaper. But making them available, it really did elevate the level of conversation taking place. And now all 13 campuses at Penn State have copies of the New York Times on it. And it's a very active readership program. And he really felt this. Reading a newspaper each day is perhaps the single most important part of being an informed and educated citizen. So we really love that. So why the New York Times? One of the greatest challenges we hear from faculty across the country is getting students to read anything. And they find that by integrating the New York Times, it does just that. It helps to connect what they're teaching in biology, it's then illustrated in the pages of the New York Times. So the first thing is really it's going to create relevancy for you. So it's the aha moment for many of your students who now say, oh, now I understand why I need to know this. 2, it promotes critical thinking, which we all know is incredibly important to teach students, how to think critically. So bringing newspapers into the class will help do that. 3, it's going to engage your students in active learning. And 4, and again, very important, is helped create a more informed citizenry. One of the most important parts of being a citizen is of being aware of what's happening outside of your bubble of information. Do you want to take?
Let's see, what do we have next? Well, the New York Times is unmatched in its depth and breadth, and as far as coverage you'll get. I'm sorry. As far as coverage you'll get, its production is better than any other newspaper. We have more reporters than any other newspaper out there, and the New York Times invests a lot of money in as far as producing a newspaper. What the New York Times has done is, for example, if you take Iraq as an example, the New York Times invested quite a lot of money in getting the news out of Iraq, whereas all the other newspapers decided to leave Iraq when it really got dangerous. And so what the New York Times did was put a lot of money in there so that we'll get the best news. For example, NBC News, which we all know, we all watch NBC on TV. NBC basically has about 6 reporters around the world, whereas the New York Times has hundreds of reporters covering the news around the world to make sure that we bring the best product to you and your students and to our readers out there. We have 26 foreign bureaus, 11 national bureaus here domestically, and we've won the most Pulitzer Prizes than any other newspaper. Can anybody tell me how many Pulitzer Prizes the New York Times won this year?
Okay.
No, I knew that.
Perfect. We have prizes for participation.
We're going to be giving prizes for participation, and that's my first trivia to you.
You can guess. There are no silly guesses. Anyone? Yes. 10. No.
That's a little high.
Yes.
3.
Walter.
3.
Your prizes.
I'll take one more guess. 5. For getting the answer right, I'll give you a choice here to pick.
And we also have the Obama issues.
I have a travel journal and a book lovers journal.
And that's significant. I mean, we're very proud of that. And I think Walter said, I mean, we don't have to tell anyone, how the New York Times is so amazing and the best journalism in the world, but we are very proud of our journalists, and we hold them very dear to the company during these difficult times. We all know it's incredibly expensive to run a newspaper, but we do not cut down on our news staff because we feel it's so important in this 24/7 world of information that we live in. More important than ever for your students to be getting quality information, and they can get that from the New York Times. It's vetted information. People are on the streets, unlike some bloggers that are writing stories from their kitchens and their bathrobes. Our reporters, and I think it's important to explain to students the importance of a good newspaper. So that's something again that we're very proud of as our news staff.
These are some classroom benefits that the New York Times will bring to your classroom. You can take a look at that.
And really, we find the benefits from talking to faculty is that when they bring a newspaper in, it's up-to-date information, it's exposing to students something other than the textbooks that you're using. It can be used as a supplemental text or as a primary text. A lot of faculty just adopt it. It's a lot cheaper than textbooks today. It's only 40 cents a copy, Monday through Friday. Students are challenged to bring real world and current events, again, to create that relevancy for you. And I think someone was saying it exposes students to good writing, just examples of good writing, good, clean writing. Have students read articles and try to emulate that writing in their course.
You can find yourself in the New York Times whether you are a student or a professor, because the New York Times will take the most complex issues and break them down so that the average person out there can really understand what's going on in the newspaper. And one of the exercises that we ask professors do, some professors that have used the New York Times, is they do the daily news quiz, and the daily news quiz, and what you actually do is print out if you go on the New York Times Learning Network, you can print out the daily news quiz, and you should pass that on to your students, and the questions are from the current newspaper or from the previous day's newspaper, and you should be able to test your students and see if they're keeping up with the news. And also that will also foster a discussion in the class and create some kind of debate in your classroom.
And this, just introducing the New York Times, this is for faculty who are really, that, you know, you're thinking about using a newspaper but have never done it. And we are very sensitive that the New York Times can be extremely intimidating, perceived intimidation sometimes by students, that I can't read this. This is what the presidents of the world are reading, and, you know, legislators, and I won't understand it. It's the New York Times. We understand students today, many of them have never picked up any newspaper. So the first thing we really recommend, and faculty have told us that they love doing this, you know, students are very busy. So to have them pick up their newspaper, and Walter will take you on a quick tour of just the A section, the first section of the paper, and do that, you know, because again, they may find it intimidating. So the first day of class or second day of class, bring the newspaper in and start a tour so they start to understand the layout of a paper. We also have pamphlets called Inside the Times, and if you're interested, Walter can send you some for your class, and it lays out the front page of the New York Times so that students start to understand how news is put in the paper every day.
Okay.
You want to do your quiz question?
You have a quiz question? Go ahead.
Where is the lead story of the New York Times found every single day? The lead story, or the most important story that the New York Times considers of the day?
You can just shout out the answer if you have it.
Upper left corner.
I think it was both of these two.
Upper left, one more try. Upper right. Who was the first person that said upper right? The professor with the yellow jacket, I think.
We have the Obama. Thanks, Emily. Oh, you want to give, yeah. So the upper right is, it's where the most important story is found every single day. And we know students many have families, they have jobs, they have classes. So if they want to quickly find out what is happening, they can quickly scan the front page of the New York Times and be able to communicate with their peers, their faculty, about news of the day.
Okay, now, does everybody have a copy of the New York Times? Yes. As you can see, the New York Times is folded in half. So what we have here is above the fold and below the fold. Above the fold, you have the most important stories of the day. And stories of secondary importance are below the fold. Okay. Now, Kathleen spoke about how everybody thinks the New York Times has lengthy articles and the articles are difficult to read. Okay. What we usually tell you, if you want to look at the New York Times, say you want to take 15, 20 minutes or to look what's in the paper on a given day, you can look at the articles that are on the front page. Most of these articles will start on the front page and continue in the inside of the paper. So you can take a look at these articles and have a good idea of what's going on internationally and nationally, and domestically, I'll say. And below, at the bottom below the fold, you have the referrals, or the refers, right here at the bottom, and that helps you to go to whatever section you may want to go to if you wish.
And
to
the
read
ad
something
at
else.
the bottom, that's something that's new to the New York Times. If you have any longtime Times readers, and again, I think in this age of advertising decline, we were forced to start selling advertisements on the bottom half of the front page.
Kathleen is talking about the ad right at the bottom here.
So you'll see that in the New York Times. Not every day, but again, it's an extremely expensive ad to run for companies that choose to do so.
The reason why Kathleen mentions this ad is the New York Times never used to put an ad on the front page. Okay. So now, if you were to turn to the page A, 2, and 3, you'll see we have a summary of the news. Let me just slow down a bit.
That's okay.
We have a summary of some of the important stories that are in the paper on that day. So you can also take a look at the summary of some of the stories if you don't have time to go through the whole article. It just gives you a brief synopsis of what's going on. And below that you have corrections. Corrections are not usually done by most newspapers. The New York Times is probably maybe the only newspaper, or maybe one of the few newspapers that prints correction. And the reason is the New York Times does not have a problem saying I'm wrong when they're wrong. And okay, now we have a trivia question coming up. You see the ads around these articles here on page A2 and A3. Can anybody take a guess how much those ads go for on a given day? These ads, I must tell you, are the companies that advertise on this page have been advertising on these pages for years. And these are prized location. This is a prized location, and they don't want to give it up.
$1,000.
$1,000? A little higher. Go higher.
$15,000.
I will, in the interest of time, I'll go with 10. It's 8, but I'll go with 10 because you're closest. Who said 10? 10. Let's see.
Let me continue the tour, just a little, continue it, or give out the gifts. Okay. So every day, if the students, you may want your students just yes.
I found that 8,000 per day.
Per day.
And,
per issue.
Depends on the size of the ad.
Yeah, if you look at the 2 ads that Walter is referring to, Tiffany's on one and Chanel's on the other. They haven't given up their ad spots in at least, I'm not even sure, 10, 20
it's been
years.
there forever.
So, and they don't want to give up those spots because it's, and then now they have them on NYTimescom. Yes?
I have a question about the comment about the corrections.
Yes.
Does the New York Times still have a full staff of copy editors?
Yes, we have copy editors. Yes. Yeah, we have lots of copy editors.
Yeah, this is a full staff. Okay.
Yeah,
No, the New York Times
they've
does.
had to give them up.
Now, if you turn to the next page, you have the international section. A lot of people think the New York Times is a New York paper. It's not really a New York paper. It's more of an international and national paper. So there's that misconception. So when you talk about a great international coverage, the New York Times is the paper of record and the paper to turn to as far as that is concerned.
So you may just have students reading the international section for a few weeks. So, and then as they slowly become more comfortable with the newspaper and the New York Times, they can discover other parts of it on their own.
What?
Yes.
I'm a former fashion student, okay? You're right, bringing such a wonderful fall and spring magazine. It'd be great if you could make that like just put it out on the newsstand separate.
From the Sunday Times.
This paper. And always manage to do that.
And just sell it.
I would pay $5 for that one thing. Big almost our idea.
That's great. Yeah, we will definitely, yeah. And possibly, I wonder, they might be able to put it on the website as well and folks could purchase it on the Times store. But if folks want to purchase one and have it, who aren't here, yeah. Yeah. It's a great idea. Oh yeah, I was going to say, so after international, it's always followed by the national section, which starts today on page A12. Sure, you want me to? Okay, you want to?
No, I just did it, but I thought you wanted to skip through for the interest of time.
Oh, got it. Okay, yeah, maybe we do. And then the national section is followed by the New York pages, and that used to be a standalone section, and now we've consolidated. So the Metro section is part of the first section. The only 2 pages of opinion you should find in the New York Times are the last 2 pages.
Which are right here.
So again, in the interest of time, if your students want to know what that national conversation is that's taking place, have them read the editorial page or the op-ed page. Another quiz question. Raise of hands, who can tell me what op-ed stands for? Yes. Very good. A lot of folks don't know that. We get a lot of different answers for that question. We have Obama issues too. I don't know if you want to give any of those out. Yeah, it's opposite editorial, and it's really just a placement section. He doesn't want the Obama issue. So, but really, those are the only 2 pages, and I think it's important to talk to students about the difference between opinion and news, and how these 2 sections report to completely different editors. They do not report to the same one. They don't sit on the same floor. It's very separated. If a student says, well, I don't want to read the New York Times, it's too liberal. Again, it's a perceived liberal bias that many students have who have never even read the newspaper. So challenge them and talk about that. Say, okay, go through an article and circle any liberal bias that you find. And more often than not, they're not going to find any. And if they do, have them talk about it. Is this really liberal bias in this story? And is the other side also voiced? How is the the reporter covering the story. And I think it's a good example of great writing. And very quickly, how do you create an argument and, write an argument? If you had more time, you'd write a shorter book. Look at those pages. You have, Tom Friedman and Maureen Dowd are rock stars at the newspaper that they can read. And they may agree, they may not agree with it, but again, it's great fodder for classroom discussion and debate. So this is a great place to go. Separate the class into 2 sections, pro and con of whatever the issues are at hand, and have people get on sides that they don't necessarily agree with. Are they able to communicate and debate effectively despite how they feel personally about a particular topic?
Okay, promoting news literacy. One of the, let me just step back and say, we did a faculty workshop last week, Emily was there, and one of the complaints we got from one of the professors, it was a professor doing the faculty workshop for the New York Times, and one of the professors complained that it sounded so much like a cheerleading New York Times session. And one of the things we talk about is promoting news literacy, is getting your students not just to read the New York Times, but also to look deeper into it. When you read the New York Times, we know the New York Times is a very good source, but also the student should also take that initiative or that extra step to go into research other articles or more material that has reference to what's written in that article, so that you can at least prove that what you're getting is really good. Not just take it. Make sure you know who that reporter is, the sources they're quoting from, are they legitimate sources? So these are things that we talk to students about, and also as professors, you should also talk to your students about when using the New York Times in your classroom.
And I think it's just not the New York Times. It can be the local paper. It can be the nightly news. If you're having them watch the nightly news and have them answer some questions on stories that they watched or things they heard on NPR or other news stations, are they able to become sophisticated news listeners, watchers, and readers? Because when they leave the walls here, are they able to go out and decipher what information they're being exposed to every single day? And again, we live in an age where there's so much on the internet, and who's creating those websites that they're going to, and they're saying this is, this is the truth, I saw it on the internet. So just, start to ask those questions with them, and we want them to be critical of the New York Times. But, all mediums, really, it's a great place to start is here at college.
Talking about the internet, when we were at the news literacy, we attended a news literacy conference at Stony Brook, and in terms of using the internet. And when students surfed the internet and they were Googling, I think Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
And the website that kept coming up was a website that was put there by the KKK. And that website kept coming up every time you Googled, it was the top website. And the students kept reading it, thinking that was the real deal, whereas it was not. So that's another thing you have to be careful about when you talk about news literacy. Make sure that whatever website you're looking at or whatever you've seen on TV or reading in the paper is legitimate.
And whatever you're Googling, the first thing that comes up isn't necessarily the most legitimate news source. Because, if they say, I'll research it, what they're saying is, I'll go Google it. So really talking about that in the classroom, how are you researching this? And again, like whose, sites are you going to? Because that was a perfect example of, just that information they were getting. Yes?
Do you have some observational experience of students using or actively using the New York Times website versus the New York Times newspaper itself?
We do, and on our website, NYTimescom, right now it's /college, but they are changing that to /edu. We have a new web launch happening in the next couple of weeks. We'll have a link to faculty who not only use the print edition, but the NYTimescom. We are platform agnostic. It's really the content that we want students to be exposed to, the quality news. But we feel that the print edition is a much different product than NYTimescom, but they can be used in conjunction with one another. And on page A18, if you look at page A18 in your newspaper today, I noticed a great article about healthcare, and you have an article here, and then it shows you a link that students can then go to, or if you're in a smart classroom, take them to that link and see interviews with folks from the article. So how do you use the web with the newspaper? I think that's what students love, is the multimedia and how the two really work together. The serendipitous learning that takes place with the newspaper, we really believe is just so important. Students are going to spend a lot more time with a hard copy of the paper when they go online, and I love NYTimescom for breaking news. No, I didn't believe Michael Jackson died until I read it on NYTimescom. So, I mean, I love our website because, again, it's the best website in the world for credible information. But I don't spend as much time on there. When I have the newspaper, I may go in looking for a story on healthcare, and I'll find a fabulous article about scorpions in Texas. I would never go on NYTimescom and search scorpions. So it's that type of learning that takes place, which is just so fabulous, and to watch it happen in your classroom is something that faculty tell us they love, that serendipitous learning that takes place when they bring the papers into the classroom.
Or discovery learning, like some people like to call it, discovering new stuff.
And increasing, we're going to speed up a little bit just for the sake of time, but increasing global awareness, again, this is some exercises. All of you who are here, Walter will email you a copy of the deck so you can take a look at it, and you'll have links as well to some of our, our college site. But separate your students into different groups. If you want to talk about global awareness, have them select different regions of the world and follow those regions throughout the semester or a few weeks and report back in terms of reporting. And they can use the New York Times, but they can also use maybe the local paper of that region, and how are these stories covered in the States versus overseas. Course content illustrated, again, I don't think this can be understated. You're going to create that relevance by using a newspaper, any newspaper, especially the New York Times, but have students, go through a newspaper and find an article that relates to the current course topic. And can they find an article that's relevant? Can they then communicate it to you? And can they discuss and defend the article, either verbally or written? Can they write down the article and give you a good synopsis and then talk about this is why it relates to what we're learning right now in class? And have them select the article, because again, that's another important step, is to have them go through a newspaper and select an article, not you select one for them necessarily. Actually, and what I'd like to do here is, Dr. Gapper, could we ask you to come up and share your... Thank you.
This is a good segue into students selecting their own content. We in the nursing department elected to subscribe to the New York Times readership program a year ago. It was actually this time last year that we began our readership program in our last course of the semester, an Issues and Trends course in nursing. And the students are on campus. I'll just give you a little of the logistics of it. Our students are in the clinical on Monday and Tuesday in the hospital, and they're on campus Wednesday and Thursday. So we wanted the Wednesday and Thursday times. But Tuesday is the science edition, and that's where there's a lot of health-related issues. So we subscribe to it 3 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We saved the Tuesday copy, and on Wednesday when they were on campus, we gave them 2 copies at once. It was distributed to the students at the beginning of class as they arrived, and we encouraged them to read the paper, the serendipitous learning, as they perused the paper itself. When everybody got in class, we then began a little discussion of some of the important stories of the day. We began just prior to the November presidential election. So even though our major objective in starting this readership program was to raise our students' awareness and to be able to critically evaluate some of the health-related issues, we just naturally also got into some political issues. You can't approach a presidential campaign without also discussing the politics of the health-related issues and how some of these issues, as we're witnessing today with the healthcare reform, how it sometimes goes awry. And so the students then began to be not only aware of health-related issues, but the politics of those issues. I'm not going to read them to you, but we ask our students at the end of the semester to evaluate, and it's just an open-ended question, and they can answer in whatever way they want. So I'm presenting to you some of the ones that I felt were most poignant, or some of them that were really most reflective of where some of them are. And I think that second one is, makes a point of what Kathleen had said earlier, that the New York Times is not a paper that our students would traditionally subscribe to on their own. But however, once they got into it, they saw the importance of current events and how it impacts their life. They were more willing to be subscribers, and as you can see with the second bullet, they actually bought the paper on the weekend. This first bullet was a student who was not born in America, but who realized that this was something that was important. She was going to be in America. She needed to learn to know the news stories of the day. And finally, a student who thought it was going to be boring and ended up really enjoying it. So don't we want that for all our students? What we ask our student, well, here's one more little thing too you can see. And one of the things that I'm most pleased about here was the fact that they recognize that they have a busy life, there's a lot of things going on, but it's valuable information they need to know about current events. Okay, so how do we use it? We ask the student to select an issue that impacts the health of the public, not anything they want. It has to be something that's covered by the Times. And they have to research that issue using 2 peer-reviewed professional journals and a minimum of 3 New York Times articles. Now, many students go way beyond that minimum, but they have to have a minimum of 3 New York Times articles. And we then ask them to dissect the problem, the who, the what, the where, the pros and the cons, and then to draw conclusions and make some recommendations to policymakers about the resolution of those issues. And these are some examples of the topics the students have selected. Already my new group, I've said the stories of the day for this semester will obviously be healthcare reform and getting prepared for the onslaught of the H1N1 virus, among many. Students' reactions to the papers I've included up there because these reactions not only are the reaction in the paper itself, but the combination of putting together New York Times and the assignment itself. The second bullet, recognition that this is going to build skills that they'll need eventually for their bachelor's and master's degree. And the other one that I'm also very proud of is that last bullet where they talk about not only different people having their own agendas and writing the literature, but the fact that research is also the way to go. So they're seeing really now the difference of what we want them to see, or how the two work together in following a story on a daily basis through the Times, and then looking at it through the eyes of a professional who's written in a peer-reviewed journal. Now, I have to be honest, there's some negative parts to that, there always are, but I must say, in response to reading the New York Times, I did not get any negative responses. Nobody said it was a waste of time, I didn't like it, I didn't want to read it, I was sorry I took this course, none of that kind of thing. They all love the New York Times. In response to the writing assignment, a few negatives, overwhelming, difficult, whatever. However, with every negative reaction, it was countered consistently, and I went through all the evaluations, with a positive outcome. So it was a lot of work, but I learned how to read the paper. It was a lot of work, but I learned how to apply APA style or whatever. So it was all. Now, from my point of view, I felt the students not only met the objectives in that particular assignment, but the second bullet, they also developed an appreciation of the New York Times and the role it plays in being an educated member of society. And finally, the pure joy as a faculty of witnessing the transformation where the student starts out thinking it's boring, I can't do this, yada, yada, and by the end of the semester, a very positive. And the last one I wrote, An Educator's Dream, this was a statement the student made, to go from never to forever in 14 weeks, I think, is a testimony to this leadership program. Any questions about anything? Yes?
You were saying that you give the paper to the students as they arrive in class.
Right.
You spend the first 15 minutes. How does that work?
In terms of?
Do they have time to read it?
They had time to read it, but I had already read it ahead of time. So there were some specific health-related stories I wanted to emphasize, but I gave it to them first for them to tell me if there was anything in particular they wanted to discuss, and then I moved into discussion of some of the health-related things. Because when we subscribe to the readership program, you get the faculty copy, so I already knew ahead of time what was in the paper for that day before the students came to class.
So Dr. Gapper gets a copy delivered to her home.
She gets a copy to me.
So I preview it in the morning over my early morning coffee. I already know what I want the students to focus on, but I always gave them the beginning part to talk about anything in particular.
Any other questions?
Okay. Good. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Gapper.
You're welcome.
And I think what's so nice, your last comment about the joy that you see students, reading the New York Times. I think another important thing that we hear from faculty is what it does to students' self-confidence when they're walking around carrying the New York Times. I mean, they can hide their People magazine, but it's not. I think that's really nice is when they start to read it and they're like, oh, this isn't. I can do this. I am smart enough to read the New York Times. So I think that can't be underestimated as well. These are 5 critical thinking tasks that, that faculty have integrated. They have students read articles, and they really go through these 5 things. They have students raise questions, gather information. How did the author gather information? Think with an open mind, so you're going to hear things that you might not necessarily agree with. Draw conclusions, and then communicate the article and effectively. Do you want to go through some of these?
As far as teaching English composition, one of the things that faculty has done is get students to read the op-ed pages or the editorial page and also write one of theirs or analyze it and use it as a debate back and forth in class. Business ethics, we have some professors that use the paper for business or economics that get their students to come in to read articles in class every day and just piggyback off the textbook what you read, basically. So they're using the textbook, but also using the newspaper as a current event that's happening, so that they can see how it translates from the textbook to real issues today in today's world. So we have a link here for sociology. These are links that you can go into and see some of the exact.
And actually, yeah, if we can show you all quickly. I mean, is this connected to the internet?
I don't think. Oh.
Do you know?
No, I don't think it connected. I must.
I don't know if we're connected to the internet. But this link is wonderful. So for sociology, we ran a great series called Class Matters. A few years ago, we ran a similar series called Race Matters. And on this Class Matters link, it's great, ways to raise questions in the classroom about class. I know it's a very sensitive topic. And then students, there are charts here and graphs, and students can fill out and see where they fall in kind of the social and class standing of the United States. So it's a really wonderful link, and again, another way that illustrates how to bring the website into your classroom.
Sorry, the website is not coming up. I think we forgot to tell them to connect it to the internet. As far as global issues are concerned, we spoke before about global issues and the coverage the New York Times does globally, and that you can incorporate in your classroom, especially when you're teaching courses like political science. You can also incorporate what's happening globally around the world and what's going on internet and domestically, and use that as a good resource to get your students very much acquainted with what's going on out in the world. We spoke before about using the quiz questions that you can get from the Learning Channel, the Learning Network, I'm sorry. You can also,
that's for current events. Yeah, I was going to say the other one, how students propose solutions, responses, ramifications. Using a newspaper in class is a great way to teach students how do I respond to this? How does my voice, how is it heard? So have them read something, and if something affects them and they want to respond to it, have them write a letter. They can write a letter to the editor, a letter to their senator, a letter to God. They don't have to send it, but it's the first step in learning how to respond to what's happening in the world around you. So I really love that. It's because a professor at NYU has students write letters to articles that they are touched by, or moved by, or angered by, and they can submit the letter, or they can talk about it in class, or they can, rip it up and throw it away. But it's really a great way to read a paper or listen to a story on the news and respond to it.
These are some of the resources that the New York Times, the websites that you can go into to check the resources the New York Times has. Unfortunately,
can we get in there,
Professor Garber? Were you able to check your email? Can we get on the internet on this?
Yes, I was able to get on the internet. Should they have an internet?
Let me see. So a couple other things here: enrich students' analysis, and again, using the newspaper with papers or oral presentations. I think, having students read an article and just getting up and presenting for even 1 minute or 2 minutes. What article did they choose? Can they talk about it in front of the class? Again, it's going to build their self-confidence and their public speaking skills, which is another really important skill to have when they leave college and they go out on job interviews. You can have them read about articles and then do a mock job interview with them. Are they able to talk about things outside of their field effectively? Compare and contrast developments over the years, and here they can use the daily newspaper and compare the financial crisis that we're in with the Great Depression using NYTimescom, the archives. So looking at issues that are affecting us today and having them go back and research, what took place 30 years ago and what are the similarities and the differences and how did we handle it then. So we really encourage use of our archives as well. And we'll try to get you on the internet and I can show you, oh good, we've got a link. Okay, so I'm just gonna type it in here. So NYTimes.com, as most of you may know, it's a free website so far. We may have to start monetizing it. As you know, with the move to the web, there are discussions taking place, but it's still free. So all you need to do is go to NYTimes.com. How many of your students use Wikipedia? Anyone? Probably too much. We have something that is so fabulous, and if you walk away with anything, I think, letting your students know about Times topics would be fantastic. So if you go to NYTimes.com and click right here, it says Times Topics. This is everything from Madonna to Miramar in terms of topics that we cover. And we'll show you its recent articles. It's a synopsis about what you're looking for. Students may hear, oh, there's so much talk about the healthcare reform, but they have no idea what it is or how we got here. So just if you click on the most popular topics, these are the most popular. And if students want to, if you're researching something in class, they can click on any of these letters and you'll be greeted with a wealth of, I'll just show you one of them, a wealth of topics, people. So we'll just go to healthcare, for example. And your students are going to be given, again, recent articles. They can be archived oldest, or they can be listed oldest to newest, newest to oldest. You're going to get, so you'll see here, headlines around the web. So these are some of the other websites that we have listed for students to go to. Again, credible sites for students to go to and compare or to read different articles. We have articles about healthcare that they can click into. And if you scroll down, we have, this one doesn't have any photos. I want to show, on some other topics, we have multimedia pieces that come with it. We have slideshows. So we know that students love, they may not just want to read something, they want to see it. So Times Topics is a great place for them to go to be quickly brought up to speed and to give you something other than Wikipedia. I know some faculty have actually banned it from their classrooms. So here you'll see featured topic is healthcare reform. And if you click on this, you'll see the latest developments. Prescriptions, you'll see photos, you'll see headlines around the web, the overview, which is really nice, again, to bring students up to speed very quickly. The multimedia pieces here, which is fantastic, interactive graphics. So I just love this site. And if you go through today's paper, a lot of the articles, as you see, have links to go online and find some multimedia pieces that go with today's article. Okay, so we're on it. Walter, do you want to show them? Okay.
Where are you? You have the learning network. Okay, let's go to
What do you want to take them to? I can take them.
The learning.
Okay.
Not, I mean, college, the college website. Did you go over the college
not
website
yet.
before? Okay.
So the college site, again, we are revamping it. Oh, I put New Times. But this will show you quickly some great places for faculty resources, and if we can get to it. Okay, so here we are. So this is the college site. And if you scroll down, you'll see here faculty resources. So Teaching with the Times, curriculum guides, study tools. The Newsroom Navigator is fantastic. It's a great place for students to go to find the websites and the blogs that our reporters are using, and archives government sites. So a great place, again, for researching if students are trying to do work for your class. So and again, all of our curriculum guides are here. And if any of you use the New York Times and want to submit your syllabi, we would love to have you submit it to us for posting on our new college website. So here, if you scroll down, you'll see we have the various curriculum guides. So political science, business economics, we have nursing, we have general methodologies. So a lot of sites on here. And what we'd like to show you quickly is how some of our other faculty are using the newspaper.
When I teach international politics, I use the Week in Review section, the magazine section, and obviously the first part of the New York Times that deals with international news. And obviously the op-ed pages too, because you get varying perspectives there.
One of our professors, our political science professors, asks students to actually track op-ed columnists that appear with regularity, some that are part of the Times staff and others who are contributors to the op-ed page, and kind of follow those people and be able to represent their views in a discussion with students who are representing others' views.
The students began a unit on the Holocaust, and for them, you know, it's something most of them didn't even know about, that the Holocaust actually occurred in Europe. And there was a piece about ancestors of, you know, descendants of people who participated in the Holocaust, but who didn't know that their own parents had participated in the German SS. And so, you know, this is the article that the students are required to read for tomorrow.
The perception of a liberal bias in the New York Times is nothing to run away from. We try to address it head on. One of the things that I do in class is distribute articles for groups of students to read, and I'll have them actually circle words or phrases that they believe indicate a liberal bias. And then when we actually talk about the substance of the article, I'll ask, by the way, did you see a liberal bias? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. They became more interested in the substance of the article.
We have a professor in our business department that has regularly been using the business section, asking the students to bring a clipping every time to come to the class from the business section, and applies what they're learning in the class.
In the Intro to Journalism class, there's a lot of how-to. In other words, look at the way the writer constructed their sentence. Look at the way they used things on second reference.
Today, a student chose an article about a dance troupe in Iraq that had one time been able to generate income and a livelihood for dancing. But that with the new administration and the strife in Iraq, that the ability to perform had been greatly reduced. In fact, the troupe had performed only five times. So the student led a discussion about the relationship of the arts and religion and politics.
For tomorrow's reading of the Times, we're each choosing an article that has been specifically or particularly meaningful for us this week, and writing a letter in response to it, whether a letter to the reporter or to someone in the article you know, a person mentioned, or the editor, or, you know, our senator, or the president, or God, or whoever you need to write a letter to. Doesn't have to be sent necessarily, but it's the first step in thinking about how to respond. What do we do with what we know?
One of our theater professors, I think, does a very creative thing with the New York Times. He takes classic performances of the plays that are, you know, classic in American society, and he compares the reviews of those performances with the reviews of performances in today's culture. So they compare and contrast the way newspaper reporters and critics are actually covering the various cultural arts.
What we do is we find literate human beings who engage with day-to-day information.
Another resource you can use here is also, if you look to the left on the archives, I know the professor right up there spoke about doing research in the library. You can, and using ProQuest, you can also come to the New York Times archives and search whatever words you want. You can see the time period. You can do today, 7 days through 1851. But as you know, you have to be a subscriber to go all the way back to 1851. So this is something that your students can come to and use as far as research is concerned, unlike using Wikipedia. Let me just step back. The For those who teach ESL classes or any of the other disciplines, if you're interested, you can come to the website and read through some of these, and this will give you examples of what other professors do as far as using the newspaper in the classroom. For political science, science discipline, you have Constitution day planning guides here for if you're looking to use that.
Do you celebrate Constitution Day here? Some campuses don't. ESL, there's a great professor, an ESL professor at Kingsborough Community College, who makes a requirement for her students to learn 30 new vocabulary words a semester. And they find them in the New York Times. So they write down a word they don't know and they look it up. And then she says they have a hard time finding words as the semester goes on that they don't know. So she really loves, you know, using newspapers just to build students' vocabulary. They read it actually with a dictionary next to them.
And one of her students credited the New York Times for helping them improve their language. That student, I always say he probably was exceptionally bright. He's an honor student, but he credited the New York Times as far as learning how to speak the English language. And what she also does is, apart from using the New York Times, she also takes them out into the city so they can practice their language skills by meeting other people and going into stores and talking to people, apart from using the New York Times and using vocabulary words out of the New York Times.
And another fun thing that one of our professors did down south is he would have his students write a letter to the editor based on stuff they read in the New York Times. And if they submitted a letter to the editor, he would give them extra credit. And we also supplied it with the New York Times materials like baseball hats or T-shirts or fun things to give away for keeping students engaged in what they were reading about. And one of his students actually had her letter to the editor published last spring. So she got a lot of extra credit. And he was so excited, and we sent her a bunch of New York Times material, so it was just very exciting for her to see her name in print. And they continued to follow the story that her letter was chosen for. So that was a really a fun exercise that he did. The Learning Network, which Walter is taking you to, is really geared more towards 3 through 12, but that's where you're going to find some wonderful things such as the daily news quiz. So if you want to print that out, you can take it beforehand to make sure you know the answers, but print it out beforehand and pass it out and get a good understanding of your students' current event knowledge, and then have them take it again maybe with the newspaper next to them to see if their scores improve.
Okay. The daily news quiz, let's see.
And then in addition, we have the issues in depth, which is wonderful. Do you want to click on that one, the issues in depth?
I was looking for the daily news quiz. You want to show them the daily news quiz? Okay.
Yeah, you can show them that, yeah.
Okay, let's just look at the daily news quiz. This is the daily news quiz, and you can print it, like Kathleen says, print it out, and you'll have the answers, and you can also print out for your students so that basically they answer the questions, but you already have the answers beforehand, before getting to class. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Through this site, can you access the New York Times Magazine?
Through the website?
Yes.
Yes.
So all that material, all those articles are on here? Or is it organized as like a separate...
It's not organized like the magazine, though. You'd have to get Times Reader 2.0, which was one of our new electronic products. That's $14.95 a month, and that's laid out more like the newspaper. Or you could get the electronic edition, which is an exact replica of the newspaper that can be downloaded to your computer each day. And that's what you're getting. That's very similar to that. That's the hard copy, but laid out PDF.
I think it's once a year the Times does that special. I don't know if it's the New York Times Magazine or if it's a special, supplement in a magazine form, where they, what's it called, like Best Ideas in 2008. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I don't know if you can get that online, though. Can you?
That's like one of the most, really interesting things that Times offers.
Yeah.
And the reason I mention that is because teaching journalism here, I often will begin by finding out what the students read.
Yeah.
And it's the rare undergraduate student, at least that I've encountered here, who will say that they look at the New York Times. If they look at any newspaper, it's often kind of amazing for them. But if I ask them, well, what papers do you look at?
Yeah.
It's more commonly, the Daily News, the Post, the Free Newspaper, AM, Metro, stuff like that. And I ask them, I try to talk to the Times just because of the breadth of that.
Yeah.
Why don't you look at the Times? And I get this interesting mixed response. The general response to news media in any form today, be it print, online, cable television, and many students get turned off of it because they, for some reason, have developed a very skeptical, biased view that there isn't too much in the mainstream news media that they can trust. They think, much of it is misinformation. However, they've developed that idea. That's another discussion.
Yeah.
But the other thing is often if I try to get them to focus, for example, the New York Times, and go, well, it doesn't have anything to do with my life. And I go, what do you mean? They go, well, where's the local news? Where's stuff about my community? It's like all this international stuff. So then, of course, being a teacher, I try to talk about, well, we all live in one world. International news is important and affects our school budgets. But they kind of focus on that. And the reason I mentioned that once a year, great ideas issue, is the other thing that comes up all the time, and it's all negative. All the news is depressing. It's all bad stuff happening. And so I was just curious if, you look on the front page of today, and, credit cards, still arguing over Iraq and Afghanistan, etc. So the nice thing about that annual is that it's all this incredibly inspiring, positive research and accomplishment and work and creativity Has the Times, do you know, like, is there a place, has it been organized where students could actually find really interesting reporting that somehow has categorized or grouped together in a way stories that model like success and positive things, even if it's about, you know, feeding starving people.
Yeah.
Look at this organization, like, is there, because otherwise I think what happens is, you know, they're just not accustomed to reading this way.
Yeah.
And so as you said, you know, it's a nice serendipitous experience, you know, to just kind of go through, oh, I never even thought of reading that article.
Yeah.
But I think they just lose patience and they get lost. And it's like, well, I don't have time to read 100 pages to try to find an article about somebody that's doing something positive about affordable housing in New York City. So I was just wondering if the Times has ever tried to collate, package things in that way. Well, it's more than you always have to do independent searches.
Well, I mean, the Times is doing a lot, you know, NYTimescom, the digital side, of course, in terms of how they're packaging articles and what have you. But so interesting, like when you say your students, I mean, I found some really funny articles in the paper today. I mean, talking about, you know, Elliot Spitzer's class at, you know, City College and how, you know, this other professor was so excited the governor of New York bought him a cup of coffee. And so I think, you know, I think students, but you're right, like in today, they're so used to going online and searching and very quickly getting, they get information very differently, I know, than many of us may have been accustomed to. But I think, so I don't know your answer to that question. I will take it back to digital, though, and ask, and then if you can give Walter or me your card, and, you know, it's a great question. I mean, they are doing so many fantastic things in digital that I just don't know if they're compiling information in that way. But I think it's a great exercise, you know, if you have the newspaper available to students, are they reading their local paper? It doesn't sound like they're even reading their local paper. I'm not sure. I think it's just the act of reading, which they have dismissed almost.
Well, at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about there's the intimidation.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh, all this international, national, I don't even know what they're talking about.
And they don't know what they're talking about.
The other thing is, I mean, I've certainly heard students say this here, is when you were saying, you know, turn to page 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Look at the advertising.
Yeah.
My students see that, they go, this is
because of the advertisers. I think that's a great, I think, yeah.
like, I don't go shop at Tiffany's.
But I think that's a great exercise for us, like a sociology class, is who's reading the New York Times, and let's just look at the advertisers in here, the advertisements. Let's just do that for this class, and who are they appealing to?
But, you know, I think some of this, I'm listening to you, and I had a similar reaction, but a lot of it has to do with the faculty that have to help them in the beginning to connect the dots.
Because,
yeah. There are Tiffany ads that are in our, you know, and I tell the students at the end of their program, when they become RNs, take your first paycheck and treat yourself. You deserve it. You worked hard. And here's something in Tiffany's, it's under $100, it may be $50 you could afford. Walk yourself into Tiffany and get that little bauble and treat yourself. And you know what? Maybe you want to spend a little more. But I think a lot of this intimidation of the New York Times and how to get through it, and how to connect this with that, I really believe that it has to be faculty here in the beginning. Because they don't know how. They don't even read newspapers. Everything is on the internet. If they're lucky, they even read the internet, and most of them don't even do that. So the whole idea of reading a newspaper is foreign to them. Yeah. Then how to navigate it is foreign to them. And then how to connect all the pieces of the story. So I think that there's some responsibility on our part, but I think it's well worth our time. Because once you do it, they're...
No, I'm just talking about
yeah.
issue, a broader audience. I mean, people gravitate to certain things if they don't see themselves reflected in it.
But I think, you know, that one exercise, find yourself in the Times, I think that's a great way maybe to introduce a paper to them, is bring some copies in, tell Walter you want some samples for your class, and have students go through the paper for 5 minutes and find an advertisement, a headline, a photograph, an article that speaks to them. And if a student cannot find themselves in the New York Times, let us know, because this exercise has been done in lecture halls, and every student is going to say, I had no idea this was in the New York Times. And if you have a smaller class, it's a great way for students to connect with you. They may tell you, oh, this photo reminds me of the horse farm I grew up in, when I was, or I lived when I was 8. You're going to make that faculty-student connection that may not have been so easily made. It's a great little exercise to do if you're able to do that. And I think it's a good way to get students into the paper, have them touch and feel it. They're gonna, they've never held a newspaper, many of these students. So that's a fun way. Don't read. Maybe they don't want to read about Iraq or Afghanistan or healthcare debates, but they can find something in a newspaper. I think it's just a joy of reading that I think faculty are trying to instill. And not everyone's going to leave Queensborough being newspaper readers, we understand that, but many will. And I think if it doesn't take place here, it probably won't happen because they don't all come from homes that read newspapers. I always thank one of my faculty, the college I went to, political science, who made us subscribe to the New York Times. And that, that started the lifelong habit of learning for me. And I'm very grateful because it didn't happen in high school. We would love it if it did. And we have some faculty who have readership programs who the next day they take the copies that weren't used and they have their students in service learning and just other areas, teachers, future teachers, bring the newspapers, the unread copies or the read copies into high schools and read to students. So it's a nice way to expose students to. And again, it's reading. I mean, that's what, but we know it's difficult because they are used to getting, just the information they want very quickly and not being bombarded with, having to go through it on their own.
I had another different question.
Yeah.
Just quickly in this section about education. Many online publications, different kinds, will have what they call a links page.
Yeah.
Now, I know that there's hot links all over the Times. But is there a place where, for example, the Times says, here would be, the other media links that we identify with as respectable or authoritative?
The Newsroom Navigator is fantastic. I recommend that. Yeah, the Newsroom Navigator. And also on Times Topics, you're going to find, Times Topics and Newsroom Navigators are links that will take you to either like that local newspaper or, the government site or what have you. They have great maps, but links that the reporter, again, it's vetted information as opposed to Wikipedia. Yes?
I want to relate to something about the ads and people who are not from the upper middle class not being able to relate to what the paper contains. I think there definitely is a disconnect in the paper. The paper will have articles about poverty, and to Christmas time they have the neediest cases and they do this, but the articles on style, the articles in the other sections are all directed toward upper middle class people. The style articles on scores, as well as the ads, are all directed toward upper middle class people. If you want people from the working class or the new immigrants who make up a large body of our students, if you want them to be able to relate to the Times, I think it would be nice if some style articles, if some living articles would be directed toward that strata of society, because the way the Times is set up now, it's not. And there's definitely a disconnect. I know someone as a matter of fact who sought a subscription to the Times because she was angry about this kind of dichotomy between, we want to, raise people intellectually, and there's no doubt about it. I have read papers from all over the country. I think the Times is the best paper in the country. And maybe the Wall Street Journal is a good paper, the Washington Post is a good paper too. But for an all-round paper, it's an excellent paper. But it does have this connection that is more to the upper middle class. And you see that in the magazine section, you see that in the style section, you see it in a lot of the secondary sections of the paper. And if you could have something in your paper that would connect that the immigrant people, that the first generation people, that the working class people could newspaper, it would just be some of the newspapers that are just pictures and no text.
But if you look at the, say for example, the New York section, they will definitely find articles that have something to do with their neighborhood and their area where they live. Because we're talking about New York now, so if you go to the New York section, they're definitely going to find articles that have references to where they live.
I read that the thing with the stores, you know, and the restaurants, I have yet to find, although you do have something under $25 in the restaurants,
Yeah.
but the stores, I wouldn't go into most of those stores because they would be much far above my budget.
So, and I can't, I mean, I just in defense, I mean, I think we have run a lot of articles that speak to the lower echelon, the lower income families, but again, I mean, we'll definitely, you know, we will communicate what we can to the newsroom. But I think if I think students aspire to be readers of the New York Times. I mean, that professor from Hostas Community College, he said that his students, when they were on the subway, they would see men in suits or women in, going to work in their nice shoes, and they would aspire to be Times readers. That, he felt it was also something that students took a lot of pride in, that he, again, was exposing them to a newspaper such as the New York Times.
You don't think it feeds into the terrible growing materialism in our culture?
Well, I think,
intellectual.
It's a great fodder for discussion. I would love to have a reporter here, because I do think it's very. I hear what you're saying. I mean, but I think we do try to cover all sectors. Whether and that the advertisements, I think, as Walter pointed out, they are incredibly expensive. So they do appeal to certain advertisers. But I think, again, that's all classroom discussion, and students. But if they read the metro section, or if they read what's happening in a different part of the world, it may not be local news, but what's happening in Seattle, Washington, could be the same issue that's facing someone in Bayside. So it just doesn't say Bayside, New York. So I think it's more the issues and what the community is doing that students relate to, than necessarily it happening here in Bayside. So, but it's a great question, and we will definitely bring it up, because I'd like to find out what are they doing to. I mean, we do a lot in all of the boroughs of New York, I have to say. With we just started this new blog, and I don't know if it's launched yet. It's in Brooklyn. Remember, Megan just told us about it.
Yeah, it's actually going to go. You'll see, if you live around the Brooklyn area, I think you'll be seeing on face of storefronts a car that maybe even at subway stations we're going to be handing out cards and whatnot.
But it's going to be a New York Times blogger.
A person that's going to be a New York Times blogger, and it's going to be a local guy from his little area of Brooklyn, and he'll be kind of reporting a day-to-day events around.
So that's what we are trying to do more, is really make it very local, but also still with the New York Times stamp on it. So, good reporting, good writing, but we are trying to get more local. I mean, I do know, the newsroom is always trying to do that. They're not trying to speak to just the well-heeled, folks out there. Something they're very passionate about is, getting everyone to read. So, and the editors spend a lot of time making sure that someone doesn't have to read a story 3 or 4 times to understand it. That's why I think if you look at the writing, it tends to be, written in such a way that you should be able to read an article once and not have to go back. And I don't really understand, so they try not to use, the sentences are just very clean. But it's a great point. Yes?
What's the grade day? Sometimes we talk about grade level. What's the grade?
Yeah, they don't give us an official grade level. I mean, we've heard lots of different things. We've heard 9th grade, and then someone said 12th grade. I mean, but again, we have 3rd graders using the New York Times for geography and math, and but the Times does not give us an official grade level reading. Unfortunately, it tends to 9th grade is probably what I've heard the most, but then some folks are very passionate. No, it's 12th grade, so.
Because the learning network, which we already have up, it's basically designed for grade 3 through 12. So we have grade 3 students using the New York Times in the classroom.
A couple things Walter and I wanted to talk about, a couple more things before all of you go are, so you know about the complimentary faculty copy that if you decide to use the paper in the classroom you get. It's only 40 cents a day, so $2 a week for your students. If you wanted to think about your department implementing something similar to Dr. Gapper's department where you have 50 copies delivered, you would talk to Walter about implementing something like that where students could pick it up when they're on campus. We also have, one thing I did want to talk about is Times Talk, and that's something that's gotten very popular. Dr. Greg Kaufman from Georgia College and State University implemented it at his campus, where students get together once a month, and either during the day or at night. I think at their campus it's actually at night, but it would be whenever you have the most students on campus. And they really take learning outside the classroom. They have students, you know, read an article, a different faculty member leads it each week. Some schools do it monthly. And they say, this is what we're going to be reading. They read the article and then they discuss it for an hour. And we provide the pizza. And students like, you know, it's nice to have pizza, but it's getting them to, it's taking learning outside of the classroom and bringing it into, you know, more informal setting. And we've had presidents of institutions lead the discussion. Again, faculty, very, you know, from all different disciplines lead the discussion. And it's so nice. And he said there's one rule, like, you know, it's discussion, conversation, not conversion. So it teaches, it shows, illustrates to students how to debate effectively, not scream at each other, but how, you know, like these town hall meetings taking place, but how do you have an excuse me, how do you have an effective conversation with folks, you know, from different sides of the panel? And it's so popular on campus that students, you know, come, you know, we get a lot of students who come every week and they love it. And again, it's a great way to start, you know, conversation on campuses. So if you're interested in starting a Times Talk, again, in your department or across the campus, let Walter know, and it's something that we can implement, help you implement. Georgia College and State University did a fabulous kind of like toolkit, how to get started, and we don't have that link on here. It will be on our website, but Walter will send out that link as well as a follow-up, so you know, you can kind of see how Greg got it going. Student essay contest.
We also sponsor student essay contests. If you want, your various departments can do their own essay contests. And what the New York Times would do, the New York Times would provide the winning prize if you're interested in doing that. So you give them the criteria that you want as far as the essay is concerned. As far as who's going to look at grading them?
Well, we're doing one at University of South Carolina where there right now the first year program really wants to teach students or talk about how to be a responsible citizen. So they're doing essays on how to be examples of being a responsible citizen. And students are submitting the articles to the professor, to the director of the first year program and the professors, and they're selecting a winner, and we are providing them with a monetary gift for the winner.
So you want them to select the winner?
They select the winner, yeah, the faculty select the winner. And we have been part of judging panels, though, for poster contests and essay contests, so it just depends on the institution. If you're interested in doing that, let Walter know.
The speakers program, you skipped that, you didn't want to touch on
sorry.
I'm not sure if you wanted to touch on that. The speakers program is bringing a New York Times reporter on campus or journalists on campus. It could be a photojournalist or just a regular journalist. They'll come on campus and give a talk, but there is a requirement of usually campuses that get 200 or more New York Times on a given day will take advantage of that particular opportunity of bringing the New York Times on campus. So that's something that you can think about if you're interested in getting the New York Times on campus. Okay. We've spoken about the discounted rate for students. It's more than 50% of the home delivery rate. It's 40 cents a day to student or faculty. For faculty who use it in the classroom, if you have 10 or more students subscribing, it's you get a complimentary copy. Like Professor Gapper gets a complimentary copy because she uses it in her classroom, so at least you're able to prepare beforehand. The archives, we've covered the archives. Times Reader gives you, it's an exact replica of the paper. It's something new that the New York Times has. And the crossword puzzles, which will basically help your students develop their language. You can also use the crossword puzzle in the classroom as far as getting them to debate each other and break them into groups and who's going to win, basically, and create some kind of competitive environment in the class. This is a quotation from a student that uses the New York Times, and as you can see, she says, reading the Times daily has only answered several.
It's not only.
Has not only. Oh, see, that's why you should wear your glasses. Reading the Times Daily has not only answered several of my questions about world issues, it has more importantly caused me to have even more questions. I'm pretty sure a lot of students that use the New York Times will agree with that quotation. This is pretty much the end of it. We'd like to thank Dean Cuomo for having us here and all of you for taking time out of your busy day to come and listen to this workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you.